Welcome back to Listen Here. We're happy to have you with us again tonight as we look at another monumental work of Dmitri Shostakovich, this time the Symphony Number 11, 1905. Joining me, of course, and at the focus of this evening's exploration of this piece is Rafael Payari, music director of the San Diego Symphony. Welcome, Rafael.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome everybody to another week of kind of a sneak peek or backstage kind of this fantastic work that we're going to be seeing, like Marta was saying before.
So I thought maybe we would set the time frame a little bit because really, for me, listening to this music, we really understand history, and it was important to Shostakovich that we do so. He was documenting in music the events, in this case, even before his birth, but certainly the events in the time in which he lived. And as we've said week to week, he really was a cinematography composer, cinematographic composer. He was a storyteller, and this was a deeply troubling time in history that he depicts, and certainly tonight's performance or discussion of Shostakovich 11, there is darkness and anticipation, there is an elegy, there is a tribute to what started in the year 1905, namely 1905, in this case in January, the Winter Palace Massacre is what we'll talk about tonight, which really led to the revolution of 1917. So 1905 was a year before Shostakovich was born, but both his father and his uncle would have been present at this event. So one can imagine he must have heard about this in his lifetime. And of course, 1917 was the Russian Revolution. In Shostakovich, he really, in this music, he evokes the struggle for a just cause. He is declaiming on behalf of the people, and he's speaking to the powerless at the being dominated by power, obviously. I think when we think back, 1941, he composed his Seventh Symphony, which was about the siege of Leningrad. He was in Leningrad at the time. He was gotten out of Leningrad. It was performed, as we know, in 1942 by those musicians still left in the city that was cut off from food supplies by the German army. He then goes to 1953, the piece we talked about last week, Shostakovich's 10th Symphony, in which was really marking the death of Stalin, so the end of this era. And now this written in 1957 to mark as a tribute to the 1917 revolution, but really going back to this event that happened in 1905, which started all of this off. And the beginning of the fall of the Romanovs and the rise in power of Lenin and then Stalin. So that's sort of the time capsule of Shostakovich's work in this time period.
Absolutely, and it's fantastic the way he just put it, which of course we're going to be seeing a little bit, but it's important to know what was going behind. And even though that it was supposed to be talking about the 40 years of the 1917, he decided to go always in his very Shostakovich way of having a little bit, have a little twist. He went back to 1905. So yeah.
And I think that in this piece, he sort of says, don't forget the oppressed, don't forget what happened, don't forget the history, and see where it leads us. And in fact, we'll talk about it a little bit later in the evening, but this was also just after the Hungarian Revolution. And he also sort of asks the question, and what have we learned from all of this? But it's a very powerful journey. And so why don't we begin with the first movement, which is marked Adagio, the Palace Square.
Shostakovich always used to say that his two favorite composers were Mahler and Mussorgsky. The 11th Symphony is very interesting because it's the first symphony really since his youth where there is very little influence of Mahler. Instead, Shostakovich has turned his attention to Mussorgsky. And the whole symphony is shot through with the distinctive harmonies, the use of folk melodies, and the storytelling and picture painting. What happened was these events in February of 1905, which were called Bloody Sunday. And what happened in Bloody Sunday was that a group of peasants and industrial workers and their families had become convinced that the Tsar was being badly advised and that really the Tsar knew how much they were suffering. So they had a completely peaceful procession to the Winter Palace where they asked the Tsar to come out and address them and correct the wrongs. And above all, what was terrible for them was they had no food. It was winter. There was no food. These people, children, were dying of cold and starvation. Of course, the Tsar, Nicholas II, was hiding out in his country palace. He wasn't even there. They didn't know that. They thought he was there. Instead, he'd given orders for the cavalry to charge them and for the artillery to fire at them. And so so many people were left dead in Palace Square. Anybody who's ever been to Leningrad, Petersburg, and has been to the Winter Palace will have seen that square, and that square was covered in bodies. The people, they had trusted their ruler. And it was precisely when they came to him in an act of trust that he murdered them. Conjuring up the feeling of the river Neva at night, the Tsar's palace, the Peter Paul fortress, he establishes from the very beginning that this is a symphony about memory, music about memory. How do we memorialize things? How do we remember what has happened to us as human beings? And then we start to hear the bugles from the soldiers in the Peter Paul fortress. And gradually, the bugles start to conjure up a melody. And that's when we get to the first song on the flutes. And the first song, he chose these songs so carefully. The first song is a song with a very, very deep and old revolutionary history. It's not actually Russian. It goes back through the Polish Revolution, right back to the 1840s, I think, the melody. It was sung by many, usually students who died in the Dresden Uprising, you know, when Wagner was involved, the various progressive movements, which so many of them came to a bad end. And the chorus of this song is, Slushai, slushai, listen. And this is in a symphony, a piece of music. What do we do in music? We listen. The songs are all about injustice. And they were made to sing these songs when they were in elementary school to justify the revolution. But actually the songs are about all injustice, all wrongful arrests, all incarceration, the taking away of freedom, the taking away of elementary human rights.
I mean, the irony on having that they have been put through this to try to justify the revolution. At the same time, he's using to say, listen, I mean, you are, taking away our basic right of being an individual. And it's the way he painted, it's just like exactly that, unbearable. And you could, the symphony has this ability, as all his music, but this one, you could actually have the chills. You could feel how cold was during that thing, that, and you could see the bluish kind of light that it will be during that early morning. It's just amazing. I mean, you could see this in in a Monet painting or something, and you will see all this stroke, but he did it in handwriting with going through Mussorgsky, kind of not using Mahler orchestration, but the Mussorgsky that was a little spaced out in his way and put it all together. And it's funny that they will ask, like, why are you doing this about 1905 if we are talking about the revolution of 1917? It's like, without the 1905, there will not be any 1917, even though he knew that kind of derailed into a different thing, but still, he wanted to put an imprint and kind of, push the button a little bit. And it's like the irony of of the revolution, that you are making all of us suffer, and you are doing exactly the same to us. It's it's devastating.
At the heart of the irony is, it seems to me, this this devastation. The rhetoric of the revolution is about righting injustice, about bringing freedom, and yet the effect is the opposite. One of the problems for that Soviet art was that they used to make people make works of art, plays, symphonies, operas, about the unjust imprisonment in the Tsarist period, which really happened. It was terrible. But if you put them up there on the stage and you say, look what terrible things happened in the 19th century, people go, hold on a moment, but they're still going on.
Right.
Nothing has
look
changed.
Outside, yeah. Yeah.
Nothing has changed.
Shostakovich 11 is one of my favorite pieces, both musically, but also the timpani part it just has such breadth to it, both musically and in the timpani writing. It's just a really unusual piece that has the timpani kind of taking more of a dominant role, more so than it is in other pieces, especially in that theme that comes throughout, the entire symphony, of that vacillation between the minor and major third of that bum 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 bum. There's a really amazing that you play it in the timpani as the quietest introduction of that theme, and then you're playing it, as loud as you possibly can later on against the entire orchestra. It's just really, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's a very exciting and challenging piece to really put forth as much emotion into it as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your part is, you could say that it's like a solistic part. You are featured through the whole symphony, and it's not, I mean, it's always very important. Every single entrance of yours is not just reinforcing something, but it's actually saying something. It's fantastic.
I mean, really that first movement, the first entrance is just amazing. When the strings are just keeping that glacial. I mean, I remember you talking about it in rehearsal, just that kind of glacial stillness of just kind of, I picture, the Palace Square with a sheen of untouched snow on top, no footprints, just that sheen of white. And then suddenly the timpani comes in with that theme, and it's so ominous, it's so dreadful. And I like to think of it as something that you just kind of feel in your gut, that something's brewing here. I don't know what it is yet, but there's something's wrong. Again, just throughout that whole movement, there's just that nervous energy from the timpani. As you start hearing some of the soldier songs and the military tunes and stuff in the background, and always interjecting that is the timpani with that, again, that minor major third. It just can't, make up. Is this minor? Is this major? It's nervous, it's unsettling, and it gets louder and louder, and then it starts to fade away again, almost as if you start to relax, like, oh, maybe not everything is, maybe things are okay. Maybe I just have a bad feeling, and I just was wrong. And then obviously the second movement comes in, and immediately that no, something is wrong. The 11th Symphony is just such a wonderful piece to play for timpani specifically, because he really knew how to write an exciting part that was challenging, that was gratifying to play, and important. Most of all, often we don't get a whole lot of melodic moments, but there really are more melodic moments in this piece for sure.
Shostakovich 11 is quite an undertaking for really all of the brass. I would say that was probably, physically speaking, the most difficult piece that I've ever played, in terms of the length and how much energy, both sort of physically and emotionally, that requires from the beginning to the end. And it was such a moving concert, from my end. Normally, when we have measures of rest, I get to sort of like hang out and listen to the orchestra, and I'm happy to. I love hearing my colleagues sound amazing, and I love being able to just relax while we're sitting there not playing. This was one of those situations where that first opening solo, very distant, very quiet, sort of military call in the distance. The moment that the horn went down, my mind was immediately on to, okay, just remember that there's like another 50 minutes of just brutal trumpet playing. And so the challenge for me was remembering to be able to pace this thing, because every time you see 3 or 4 fortes, you just want to grab the bull by the horns and go after it. And you realize, there's still like 12 pages left of this.
And probably with another 6 fortissimos extra.
Exactly. So I would say that's probably also maybe about the loudest that I've ever played in a symphony orchestra in that last movement. That it took a lot of sort of concentration to keep it together.
Yeah, it's not a marathon anymore. It's like an Ironman, and not like
totally.
Yeah, and you will also have the very distant kind of suffering bird bugle kind of melody in the back, and then you have the brutality of this whole thing going. And when you think that is there, no, it's even more. And then no, you're there. No, another step. It's
Yeah, we in the trumpet section, we kind of made some interesting decisions that for me in the opening solo, I played on a C trumpet and with the mute in, and we had some discussions about the mute also, and do we want a metal mute? Do we want like more of a fiber mute? And after kind of having people sit out in the hall and listen, we decided on actually sort of a nylon mute. But the C trumpet gives it that sort of like, with the mute in, it's very sort of dry, and you get the really high end tones of that. And then we went to the B flat trumpet for everything else. So I was kind of switching back and forth between horns in that piece, but we agree that the B flat trumpet kind of gives it that quintessential Russian sound, so you're not just getting all the highs of the C trumpet, that we're able to really kind of get like a meatier sound and hopefully a more aggressive, thick sound as we went along. It just kind of gave a much different sound characteristic and in the end a feeling for us, using those B flat trumpets. And that's something that I've experimented with before in playing Russian music, is trying to use B flat trumpets to get kind of just we don't want necessarily a French sound. We wanted something with a little bit more breadth to it, without having to work so hard on the C trumpet to get that. So hopefully that came across.
The events of the 105 Revolution, or the particular events that Shostakovich is describing in this, it's like an opera or a movie, but in a symphony.
Yeah.
And because socialist realism said you have to describe things precisely, he goes, okay, I will describe things precisely. That's what you want. That's what I'll give you. And the result, of course, is completely the opposite of what they had in mind. With this symphony, he offended everybody. He offended the authorities. He offended the young students who were all left-wing agitators or whatever they were, and hippies, and they hated it.
Yeah, and the way he wrote it, because of course he spent putting the mood in the whole first movement, so you could, you know, smell the air, feel the chills and everything. And then when you get into the second movement, and you could hear the inconformity that the people were going through. You could hear then how this whole thing is getting inside everybody, and that's why they are going there in peaceful way to just demand something better. When you have how they just open fire and just run over them, it's just, I mean, you could see it. You hear the music and actually you could see it, and you could smell the blood. You could smell the whole thing, and you could actually see how all the snow that once was white, it got muddy and bloody.
Really favorite part of this piece for me is that moment in the second movement when right before the percussion ensemble comes in, essentially, you know, which is, I always think of as just the military might, so to speak. And you know, it just, there's the, you know, these slow trombone glissandi coming up before then, and it's so menacing. And then suddenly, you know, the whole orchestra is playing those big quarter note triplets. And then suddenly, yeah, the percussion ensemble comes in, and the timpani, I feel, is almost like the general. You know, the timpani is a loud instrument. It can always be heard, but that's a moment where even playing as loud as I can with big, heavy, you know, hard sticks, you know, it's still straining. It feels like the timpani is screaming, you know, screaming out over this chaos. And you always want to make a beautiful sound, but it's kind of that rare time where you're trying to make a beautiful sound while also sounding strained and sounding oppressed and sounding, you know, just you're yelling, you know, everyone's yelling at each other and fighting, and then the silence that comes after that is shocking. It's a powerful piece.
Yeah, absolutely. He has this fantastic ability to paint the full scope. He gives you this whole thing, and you could, like you say, you have this contempt, you have this feeling growing and screaming, and then you get that kind of rage that we will not forget. Listen, bury your head, but we will not forget. This whole thing, and everybody's running. I remember telling the orchestra, it's like, it's a fugue, yes, but if you relax, you are going to be run over. So you can relax. We have to do a little bit of balance to being able to hear all the voices, but you have to fear for your life and play it. Shostakovich put it in such a impressionistic and yet realistic way that you could hear it, smell it, and, you know, have this whole horror in front of you before going to the elegy, of course, and the eternal memory going into there.
It's endless. We all know it's endless, this cycle of the powerful destroying the lives of those who have no power. And that is the drama that he wanted to tell.
That incredible intensity, and hearing from Chris and Ryan there, it's sort of, you know, the Olympics of stamina in terms and concentration, and you know, stretching the dynamics, stretching the extremes of the instruments themselves, gives you an indication of the power of the story, but also the power of the writing of Shostakovich.
Yes, absolutely. I I remember that during rehearsal, there was one moment through this movement that I was looking at Jeff, and then we talked. There was I think it was a break or something. I was telling him that there's a moment in the middle of this that I really feel frightened. It's just, I mean, it's so vivid. It's so, I mean, the way he described and we played, it's so palpable that it's frightening. And you could see and smell the blood and see the whole thing. It's really powerful. It's really, really remarkable.
Those were searing performances. I remember that weekend well.
Yeah.
And I would like to be able to go right back and hear it all over again.
Yeah.
But many have been inspired by Shostakovich. We were, talking about film composers, and many film composers that came to this country, especially after World War II. But certainly John Williams is among them. You listen to John's scores and you hear his influence of Shostakovich for sure.
Yeah, especially with March and everything, the way he puts the brass, the percussion, and then the orchestra comes along. It's you could have it as like, wait a second, but then you see it's him. Yeah.
You think about this time in the Soviet Union and the oppression of artists, this adherence to socialist realism, the art that had to reflect the happiest of times, the power of the working people, the happy workers on the farms, and anyone who wrote differently or composed differently or had poetry that was different was an enemy, and many sent away never to be seen again. This comes now after the death of Stalin, and he's telling this, cautionary tale once again. Listen, but you can also hear the fear. You were talking about fear a moment before.
Yeah, and it's also Shostakovich in that way that having this platform that he was always afraid of what he was going to say, or any artist colleague were going to say. It could mean literally to be prosecuted and be dead, like they were saying during those days, just to be killed like dogs on the street. Literally, just put it like that. Terribly. Nothing against dogs. Of course, I love dogs, but that was the way that they were talking during those times. But it's fantastic how Shostakovich now, when he goes into the elegy, when he goes to the third movement, this was a song that it was well known by everybody. It was even sang at Lenin's funeral in 1924. And then he just put it in here also because, of course, there's all of that, but it's like what we started this revolution, we were trying to go, and it was put upon us, and we are doing exactly the same. And we are not realizing with the uprising of the hungry. It's all the time he had this twist that even though it could be danger, has the courage to get out and say it, even though it's a little bit like a code, but always have this thing, and it's remarkable, really.
It is remarkable. And I think it was code also to all the people who were listening to it. He would put these people's hymns or these revolutionary songs, and he would then construct them into the whole fabric of the piece. But they were symbols, they were signals. It was saying, you know what this means.
Yeah.
You know why this is important.
Exactly. I'm being camouflaged by, it's about that. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
So the third movement is entitled Eternal Memory. Do not forget, eternal memory.
The melody of the third movement is perhaps one of the very few of those revolutionary movements which has gone around the world, especially with left-wingers. You fell as a victim. Вы жертвою пали. You fell as a victim. And I used to have a friend who was, he's dead now, a wonderful old Trotskyite revolutionary from the 1960s. He was fantastic. And he grew up in an old East End London communist background. And I once pointed out that melody to him because he loved Shostakovich. And he said, yeah, well, I know that tune. He said, that's what we used to sing in my parents' communist funerals. We used to sing it here with English words. So that tune did go around the world. And it's a sort of non-religious anthem, paying tribute to those who lay down their lives.
I think for all Shostakovich, he's really good at. I always think like he can be a very good director for films. The whole symphony to me, it just sounds like it's a movie. Like we're watching a movie, and he's so good at creating that kind of atmosphere. But I feel it's very challenging to play the first note. And it's difficult enough to play in one person, but you have to lead the whole section to come in. I feel that's one of the worst things, actually. But once you come in, it's another story. It feels like emotionally you are sort of grounded into this melody, a nice melodic line. It's not really about the negativity, but it's not something that's very warm. I don't know if you understand what I mean. It's something that's underneath, that's very hard to describe. In that stage setup, like we talk about as a film director, that you have this, you see the smoke, right? It's still there. And I was actually a military before, I don't know if you know that, but you can actually feel that, you can smell that smoke coming from, the guns or grenades or whatever, the bombs. You can feel that, you can smell that, and you have this kind of melody that's coming in from basically nowhere, but you feel the emotion that's going on, that's building up. To me, the main difficulty for that particular excerpt is it sounds a little bit contradictory, but it's the simplicity of the melody itself, and how to start. I mean, counting is one thing, but to have that that atmosphere set up.
Yeah, because there's a lot of contempt. I mean, there's things like, of course, you are honoring who the ones that have been falling already, but at the same time there's something building up inside that you want to honor, but at the same time you want to go to a different place, and you will not let this be in vain. So that kind of both grounded, having that kind of respect for those, but at the same time trying to contempt that rage that you get in. It's a mindset. Yeah.
Right, and then he didn't write any dynamic markings other than the piano at the beginning. So, we listen to recordings with people playing, starting forte or starting piano and then build up to forte when the register goes up. But it just feels like, I don't think we should actually reach that forte just because that's kind of, yeah, like containment that you're talking about. There's something that's underneath the turbulence, but it's still withholding and the top. I feel that's what it is.
Like, yes, it's like almost thinking out loud is dangerous. And there's a moment that you could actually speak, and then, like, yeah, every moment that we, open our mouth, it could mean something. So we better be content again.
It's so dramatic that the entire symphony is actually very dramatic, but also the time. I feel like it's the how much tension he's creating before anything happens. That's just it's incredible.
In the middle of that movement, he also quotes another revolutionary song, which is another of these Polish songs from the 1840s, which actually, when it's sung in revolutionary occasions, is a quick march. It's a sort of march to action. But he slows it right down and he distorts it completely. I find that absolutely fascinating. The harmony becomes so strange there. It's almost as though he's not mocking, but he's somehow portraying how people's ideals, in the face of reality, they crumble, they collapse, they become distorted.
And above all of that, because he put it in an amazing way, and of course, this fantastic, wonderful climax, and you have the timpani, pam, 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 pam. It's like, we will not forget, like, that wasn't in vain. And this is a little bit of his way of putting a whole line into the bow kind of way. It's like, we will not forget this. It's not going to be in vain, all of those loss. It's, before getting is like, maybe we can't now, but one day we will not forget. This is not going to be in vain. It's really mesmerizing, because it just takes you to that world and throws you there.
We will not forget. That is absolutely seared into that movement. Raphael, you are standing on the podium in front of our orchestra, and you're this far in the piece. How, like, the emotion of conducting this must be tremendous.
Oh yes, it's crazy. It's like like what Chris was saying, and Ryan and everybody saying. I mean, the way you have to kind of pace yourself, you have to be smart. I don't know how to pace myself. I really just go for it this all the time. And but I remember that the first performance that was on Friday, we have to do it twice. So we have to do it in the morning and then in the evening. And once you go through the thing, and after going through rehearsal, there's a moment that you said, like, okay, we cannot go through that again, but let's fix this, and then we go for it. And it's just, because the emotional roller coaster is so strong that it gives you both adrenaline, and at the same time it makes you tired, but everything comes all together. So it's actually afterwards that you realize how much that you are completely drained. But in this point, you're just waiting to get this alarm and start the fourth movement immediately. So it's I don't think that I really map my pacing. It's I can't.
So the fourth movement is tocsin, alarm. And the alarm is not a literal bell ringing. It's a warning. I mean, now you are doing to the Hungarians who want more freedom what happened to you. He's saying, look out. History repeats itself.
Yeah. And even worse, because let's say that the first time there's no way to kind of justify that, but okay, it happened, we don't know, and then we have to go through this whole thing, 50 years of this, and then later we do exactly the same to the fellows that are just really close from us with the Hungarians. It's, the hypocrisy, too frontal to bear and not say anything.
Yeah, and he says, look, it's about 1905, which led to 1917, but do not forget, Hungary just happened in 1956. Do not forget this.
Yeah.
So you have such contrast in this last movement, including Andrea Overturf, who has this beautiful solo so close to the end, a great elegy, as it were. And then at the end, the bell sounds forth. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, we go into, after tying all the songs again together, we're just going to get this after Andrea's beautiful horn solo, English horn solo. It gets again in the frenzy, do not forget what happened, and we get the themes of the second movement. That is when all the restlessness and everything were actually happening and growing before getting into everybody being run over. That in Hungary, just a year before, they killed 600 people at just one protest. So we have this, and then he adds the bells. And it's a phenomenal way, because the bells, for so many people, a bell, it could mean, it's time, it's joy, it's triumph. But the bells in here, they do not sound like that. And it's not a warning, but it's always a bell that you like, don't forget, listen, don't forget, listen, 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 listen. And that's why it's, for my taste, the last bell, the last chime has to resonate and stay there, because even though we have that rush of feeling like, wow, we just went through this amazing symphony, we cannot forget, listen, and try not to repeat our mistakes again.
And I can still hear it ringing from that performance.
Yeah.
So let's hear the fourth movement, Tocsin.
In the last movement, he practically makes a medley of different songs. And the songs, he starts to pile these songs up on top of one another. So the very beginning of the last movement is a song from the beginning of the 20th century, Rage Tyrants, Besnuitis Tyranni. And that song is a song of defiance. It's a protest song, basically. It's where poor people, people without rights, people fighting for their rights, say to the tyrants, you can do what you like. You will never stop what we stand for, the truth of what we stand for. And it was a song that used to get played on official Soviet occasions. But the way, I don't know what it is he does to the orchestration. I think it's something to do with the spacing of the brass instruments, at least in part.
Yeah, and they made it into a march-like kind of call to war, or to a fight. Not war, but to a fight, like, we are going to stand. It doesn't matter how much you push us, we are going to keep pushing back, pushing forward,
And then the next one he brings in is the famous Warsaw song, which, as its name would suggest, which has again gone all over the world. There are lots of different versions of that tune. And he's so brilliant, I think, what he does with that melody, because it's a very self-contained tune, but he never lets you have the whole tune. He keeps starting it. So the audience goes, oh, we know this tune, but then it goes a different direction. It moves. And fantastic, I love the way he's writing for strings there. He's using the G strings on the violin, the C strings on the viola, the C strings on the cello.
Especially being that high, the sound of the string to actually project, it kind of struggles a little bit more, instead if you are going to change for the D string or for the A string. So you have that kind of contempt that you are going there, but it's the sound, you have to get it. The sound is going, it's like a mezzo soprano singing something in the range of a soprano, that if it will be a soprano singing, it will be more direct and more free. But if you have a mezzo soprano going into there, it's going to make a little bit of a struggle. So that's what he uses this way. So you have that kind of contempt that you have to actually push through for the sound to actually being able to project.
that theme, which we hear at the very beginning of the symphony and comes into every movement, comes from his own setting of this poem about the Bloody Sunday. But it's the setting of the very opening words of the poet Arkady Kots, who was a Jewish revolutionary of the early 20th century. And Kots writes this very powerful phrase, "Обнажите головы," bare your heads. And that takes you back to the whole idea that in all those cultures, when the dead are there, you take your hats off. You bare your heads. And why do you bare your heads? Not just out of respect, but also, I'm afraid, out of shame. And shame, it seems to me, is very deep in this symphony.
This particular piece, that was my first time playing it. I've never played it before. And at this point in my career, I've been in the San Diego Symphony for 11 seasons now, and I had had experience before then. And so most English horn solos I've played quite a bit. And of course I studied them and in college. So it's a unique experience at this point in my life to play something I've never played before that's a major solo. So, and then that particular solo spans pretty much the entire register. So you start in the very lowest register of the instrument, which is really scary to enter on. And of course it's, one of those really delicate entrances where the strings, as are just, shimmering and you have to come in and on this low note, which on an English horn, in the worst circumstances could sound like a donkey. When I'm preparing at home and ahead of time for this, as a brass player, you would know about practicing attacks. Right. So a lot of solos like that, where I have a really touchy entrance, I just practice the first note the whole week before, just 2-3 dozen times every day while I'm warming up, just and just to get the right attack. And then you have the whole solo where you have, 2 sections, and you have the first section that's low. And I feel like that's kind of, you've had all of this carnage beforehand. And so you've been through so much, and all of these people have died and all of these atrocities have happened. And so I feel like the English horn at that moment comes in and is kind of the cautionary voice, of say, remember what has happened, and see what has been done, see what has happened in the low register. And then you have the second iteration of the solo, just when you think it's over and there's a couple bars off, then the strings, come in for a couple bars, and then you come in again as the English horn player and play the same thing relatively an octave up. And so that's even more uncomfortable because it's a really high register on the English horn, and it just gets higher and higher and higher and higher. And so it's a test of stamina, but I also feel like musically that it's, so you go from this kind of warning of not repeating the past and, see what happened, to, I think the upper octave, my interpretation was it's very ethereal and it should kind of float. And this should represent the spirits of the victims, I think. Should just be very, very much an elegy. But because it's in such a strained register for the English horn, this is just my interpretation, but I think that there's something that, while it's an elegy, it's also, there's something very strange and alien and uncomfortable about it at the same time, that it doesn't set well. It's not completely peaceful, but yet it needs to have a beauty and a smoothness about it, and it does need to sound as effortless as possible.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's challenged the English horn from the voice I'm trying to it, because it is beautiful, but what we have seen is so terrible as well that we feel vulnerable. And I love the way you look at it, like, yeah, you could see them from afar, you could sit down and see all of this carnage that had happened, and then have an elegy like, okay, yeah, we cannot forget this. It's gonna be, and then it comes with the creation of the coda finale, which is another thing, yeah, with the shine and everything.
Yeah, then all hell breaks loose again one final time. But yeah, it's also, talking about the challenges as a player when you're playing a solo like that at the very end of the symphony. You just kind of know that that's looming. So you don't want to spend too much of your energy. You kind of have to let your colleagues do that for you, and you're playing your part, but you have to save something for the very last push.
And with all these themes, many of the themes or fragments of them come back in the kind of washing machine of the last movement, which is like a sort of demonic carnival. It's like something from Faust, with all these crowds and shouting these various melodies. But at the end, two voices come in and dominate as all the other melodies are swinging roundabout. One of them is the orchestra, the brass, going, "Bare your heads, bare your heads, obnажите головы, obнажите головы." And then over the top of it, another voice comes in from the very beginning of the symphony. Слушай, listen, listen, listen. And just, it's completely obsessional. It's like Kafka or something. And at the very end, the very last bars of the symphony rises up, the orchestra rises up like a great wave, and it goes, for the last time it goes, "Обнажите головы, bare your heads." And then 3 times the orchestra goes, "Listen, listen, listen."
Yeah.
Apart from anything else, it's an astonishing demonstration of what he thought the point of music was.
I can't imagine being there for the first performance of this in Moscow, and what first of all the orchestra sounded like, and also by this point Shostakovich was really a rock star. I mean, this was a hugely popular composer with a great amount of acclaim for his works. People clamored for more. It must have been an amazing experience.
Yes, yes, indeed. And of course, him being himself was trying to criticize the regime, even though Stalin was already dead. But this regime, as we know, was still pretty much in power with just different, let's say, phases. And it was kind of a risk that he took of trying to criticize this and then being able to stay. And then he actually received the Lenin Prize just a year later. He took the risk, and he was somehow always saying, like, yeah, I don't think they will understand. The other people, they will not catch me, and always put it with his nervousness and this whole thing and his courageous self. But it's, yeah, it must be crazy to be during those times. Yeah.
Well, and I remember the performances, the orchestra sounded so profound in that weekend, as we were saying earlier. It's a nice memory to be able to hear snippets of it again.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful. Well, of course, now it's even stronger now to that was our last concert together, because it was in February, and then the next concert was going to be at the end of March, which we know what we are at the moment. So yeah, it's a wonderful memory, and of course make us be again all hungry and thirsty to be back together and making music again and sharing our passion with everybody.
Well, it's clear from the musicians that we heard from tonight, but the entire orchestra, Shostakovich is somehow in their blood, and to do it with you. And I think our audiences have also really, really looked forward to revisiting this composer, which we will do many times in the future.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan, and yeah, I mean, the audience always has received it so greatly. So yeah, we will go for more for sure.
So next week, we'll turn our attention to Prokofiev, and slightly different, still very much in the Russian style. And we look forward to that. And it's been good to have time with you tonight and to explore the world of Shostakovich.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be being able to speak about music a little bit, and always great to have you here and all the audience that are joining us tonight. So thank you very much. And if everybody could tune in next week, we will be here having fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.